Hey everybody, Carl Wockner here. So we're going to do a tech tip today, talking about live looping and outputs and routing and what the best options are for you. Stay tuned. Pew, 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 pew. Pew, pew. All right, hey everybody. So I have an RC300. This is a Boss live looper. Now most loopers, even if they're just a single pedal one, they'll have at least one input and at least one output. It would be fantastic if you could have multiple inputs and then you could have so many different versions to output. Most of the time, the outputs are a summarized version of the entire loop, including the instrument that you plug in. So even if you have guitar, keyboard, beatbox, microphone, etc., unfortunately, most of the loopers that are out there on today's market, they only have up to a stereo output. Even the Big Daddy looper like the Boss RC505, it has 5 tracks, but it only has 2 outputs, and that is a left and a right, a stereo left and right. So most loopers on the market, I will generalize and say most loopers have one stereo output, and that is a left and a right. And unfortunately, even though you can have multiple inputs, everything has to come out just those 2 outputs. So the critical part is, what's the best way to route them? Well, there's a few different options. The easiest of those options is to just go mono, which would be the left-hand channel, straight into a DI box or mixer and straight out. And that's your option. And the trick is blending all of the volumes on the way in to make sure that you're getting the right mix when you're sending it. Option 2 is a little more of my favorite, and what I believe most people should do is utilize the left and the right outputs. Now there's a couple of different ways you can do that. The first way is to leave whatever signal you're running as a stereo signal. So if that's a delay that's pinging and ponging to the left and the right hand side, or if that's a keys or something that has more of a stereo input, you can allow it to be a stereo output and then route one to the left and one to the right. Alternatively, something that a lot of people overlook is being able to pan each track. So in their looper, I have 3 different tracks, okay? You can pan each of these outputs to either the left or the right. Now, track 1, you might prefer to come out the left. Track 2, you might prefer to come out the right. Now, even though the output on the back is a stereo output, you're just saying you've got one on the left and one on the right. They don't necessarily have to talk with each other. So you could pan track 1 all the way to the left and track 2 all the way to the right. That way you have your entire loop that you've set on track 1 coming out the left and your entire loop set on track 2 coming out the right. And then track 3 on this particular looper, you could either just have that coming out both or one or whatever. So that's an option. That's a really good option for anybody with a stereo out that has a looper with those capabilities of being able to pan the tracks. One step up from that is, I noticed there's a lot of people that do have this same looper that I use. And this is mostly one of the biggest reasons that I actually use this looper is it has, as I mentioned before, 2 separate stereo outs. So that is 4 different sends. Now it has a main left and right, and it also has a sub left and right. And the beauty about that is I'm actually able to decide which output track 1, 2, and 3 comes out. That means I can have track 1 and 2, for example, coming out the main left and right, and I can have track 3 coming out the sub left and right. Is that a great idea? Yes, and also no. The trouble is with looping, the more outputs that you have, especially if you're going from venue to venue and you're using various different audio interfaces, different mixers, different PA systems, it can get quite confusing. And this is, I guess, one of the cons of having multiple outputs, and especially if they need to be mixed in a slightly different way. If I know anybody who's out there who's a looper, similar to myself, I generally have very different things coming out of my 3 different tracks. Some of them are beatbox, some are bass orientated, some are rhythm orientated, guitar orientated, and they all require slightly different mixing, etc., and even volumes. Sometimes if there's so many outputs, the trouble is it becomes too overwhelming to get the mix right, and you're actually biting off more than what you can chew. And sometimes it becomes a bit more of an easier, simpler option to just have fewer outputs to be able to just match them all the same level, and it'll end up sounding better and it'll be quicker for setup and pack down. Now, the ultimate option, which is something that I've considered and I've actually done a couple of times, but it refers back to my previous statement of it's an absolute mission to set up and pack down. And if you haven't got anybody running the front of house sound perfectly for you that is very familiar with how you do it, it's a total nightmare. So this method is, and this will only really work with one of these larger loopers. is it's something, if anybody's familiar with a DI box. If you're not, I'm actually going to do a video about these DI boxes. But essentially, it converts an unbalanced signal to a balanced signal. But the beauty about these is it actually has a link out. So you can split the signal that you're sending from your guitar. What I suggest is to split the signal from your guitar before it even gets into the looper. That gives you a totally separate guitar channel before it even gets to the looper. So you already have your guitar going to the mixer. Secondly, you'll have your stereo left and right out, which could be made up from track 1 or 2 or both. You can pan track 1 and 2 to stereo left and right, or stereo left or right. Track 3, for example, could go out the sub left and right. So for me, that personally, I would have a stereo guitar send, stereo track 3, I would have a mono track 1 and a mono track 2. I have 1, 2, 3, 4 separate sends, 2 of which are stereo. That is a pretty incredible thing to be able to split up the sound, especially if you're running multiple versions of tracks at any one time and they require different equalization, analyzation, and mixing. Very, very handy, and you can get the most out of your looper on especially on the larger stages. It'll make quite a bit of difference. Something else that is kind of handy too, on my particular board, if anyone's familiar with it, if you've checked it out, I have a HX effects, and when I route, I actually do an effects loop, which I route out to an overdrive pedal and back. That is also something I've checked out and thought maybe if I run my overdrive pedal straight out instead of back in, I'll get an additional out to be able to EQ my overdrive totally separate. Now, all of that to say, I don't do that almost ever. Right now, I play so many shows. I play a lot of local gigs. I tour, I play parties, weddings, events, massive stages, tiny stages. I play anything and everything at this point in my career. And sometimes it's just a nightmare having so many outputs and so many different versions and algorithms of things that could go wrong. So what I suggest is doing something in between the most busiest version of that and the simplest version of that. And if you have something like this pedal, which I know so many people have, so apologies if I reference this one in particular so often, but I use it and I can tell you exactly what I do with it. What I do is I route my input signal of my guitar out either the main left and right or the sub left and right. So it's independent. My acoustic signal is independent of my loop. Then I route the entire loop that I make on this, track 1, 2, and 3, to come out the other output. So I have one stereo signal of my guitar and I have one stereo signal of my loop. And I find that that is hands down the easiest way to run into all of my venues with minimal signal difference between the max version of the 8 outputs that I was talking before. The beauty about this is you can go into any venue. If you're not doing the live sound and someone else is doing the live sound, you can say, look, I've got 2 stereo sends. I need you to match all the signal, all the levels, everything going to the subs, all of that stuff. I'm just sending you 2 independent signals. One is my guitar or instrument and one is my loop. And that is usually the easiest way to go and honestly the best bang for buck. And one thing I will finish off by saying is it also enables you to just be able to run a tiny little mixer like this. There's so many different versions. I have a digital rack mount stuff that I use for big shows, but honestly, for all of the smaller shows that I play with less than 100 people, and I'm doing my own sound, even on a reasonable size PA, I've just got this tiny little Yamaha desk. I do a lot of fly dates, which means I have to pack a lot of things up into a suitcase and fly, and this is super handy. Best part about it is I run my microphone into here, I run my guitar left, right into here, and my loop left, right into there. Output into the mixer, headphone into my in-ear monitors, and I'm totally done. I'm using almost every single input and output on this mixer, and it's fantastic. And provided you get the right input signal and provided you get the right EQ on your guitar and tones, you shouldn't have any feedback issues, especially at the volumes that you'd be running. So, man, I hope this helps anybody. Apologies for the very quick version rundown, but I wanted to try and cover as much as I possibly could. I hope this helps you guys. Please DM me in the comments below. Let me know if there's anything you'd like to know more about, or hit me up if you have any questions. So you can also count on seeing a lot more of this content. I'm splitting my YouTube viewership in half. I'm going to be doing a lot of artist stuff for my originals, live looping covers, and my musical side of things. And then you'll be seeing a lot of videos just like this, which is tech tips and tricks, which hopefully you guys can use, especially if you're a looper or an instrumentalist. So love you guys. Thanks for tuning in. Please like and subscribe. I really appreciate it being an independent artist. And if you haven't already done so, please check out my original content on Spotify and all the streaming platforms. Take care. Have a fantastic day. I will catch you another one. Bye.